to Daybreak USA for a Wednesday. Now, ironically enough, I just happened to go online just the other day to boxofficemojo.com. I try to keep track in what the hot movies are and what the hot tendencies are when it comes to movies and how they're made and what makes money. Would you believe that Alice in Wonderland just made $1 billion at the box office? But to give us a little bit more background when it comes to that is a lady who's responsible for a couple of children's books, including The Real Alice in Wonderland, a role model for the ages. It's CM Cathy Rubin. Miss Rubin, good morning. Welcome to Daybreak USA.
Good morning, Bobby. Thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you, especially considering you know probably what a lot of our listeners, including myself, don't know, and that's kind of like the backdrop for The Real Alice in Wonderland. What's your relationship to the original Alice?
Correct. The story behind the story. It's an amazing story. I mean, some may say it's even more fascinating than the character she inspired, Alice in Wonderland. Alice Little, the real Alice in Wonderland, my relative, was actually a 10-year-old child who inspired Lewis Carroll to write the greatest children's book of all time. And a few years ago, her personal effects were sold at auction. Her photographs, letters, her memorabilia, much of which, by the way, were gifts from Lewis Carroll over the years. And it's given tremendous new insight into the story behind the story, her story, which is fascinating, which my daughter and I decided to tell. It's taken us 3 years, but the book is finally out and getting a very good response.
Now, quickly, Cathy, tell me, is writing in your family's history, or was it just something that, basically inspired by Alice's success, you just thought you would kind of jump in as well?
No, not at all. I'm actually a children's book author. I have other books that have been published over the past few years. This was a story that my daughter's school did Alice in Wonderland for Book Day.
Okay.
I have always known I had a connection to the real Alice, but honestly, I never, it went in one ear and out the other. It was the sort of stories your grandmother would tell you. And you'd listen, you'd say, oh, that's great, but I never really saw the relevance or the significance of it.
Okay.
Until my daughter's school did the book for a class day, and the librarian said, would she and I do a workshop for the kids on the story behind the story? And pun intended, we jumped down the rabbit hole and we couldn't get out, because the further we dug into the story through family and contacts, museums, libraries that helped us out, we uncovered this incredible story that in many ways, what's fascinating about the story is that Alice's story in many ways mirrors the fictional story. And, as soon as we sort of caught on to many of the parallels between her life and the fictional Alice, we couldn't stop going. And we presented it to the kids. They loved it. And really, librarians and teachers and, my own editors and publishers, have said to me, you've got to do something with this. When I heard about Tim Burton's film, I'm a huge Tim Burton fan, I thought, wow, well, maybe there'll be renewed interest in Alice in Wonderland. And if people love the story, maybe they'll want to know the story behind the story, which is just as wonderful.
Joining us, CM Cathy Rubin. She's the author of The Real Alice in Wonderland, a role model for the ages. And she's actually giving us some backdrop on the actual Alice in Wonderland, Alice Little. Now tell me, what were the repercussions of Alice in Wonderland's success at the time that Alice actually wrote it?
The time that Lewis Carroll wrote it. Lewis Carroll wrote the book, and pretty much after Alice talked him into creating the book for her.
Okay.
There's an original manuscript here, a journal that he walked around for almost 2 years, handwriting and hand-drawing every illustration in for her. The only book, I might add, that really he ever wrote down that became a monumental work, literary work. That book he gave to her when she was 10, 11 years old.
Okay.
Then he got interest in publishing, a book by Macmillan, and that's where John Tenniel comes in, the illustrator we all grew up with, the Alice in Wonderland illustrations. The book was released and immediately found, a lot of success. Although the critics didn't really take to it, it was very split, critically. People loved the story and bought the book. Really, as the book becomes more famous, so does Carol. And so does people's, intrigue about, well, what inspired the story?
Okay.
Where did the story come from? People discover there is a real Alice. And as Alice, grows through her life, she becomes more and more associated with the Alice in the book, the fictional Alice. And what is wonderful is towards the, especially towards, the middle of her life and the end of her life, she's able to use this celebrity to give back. She was a great humanitarian, especially for children's causes, children in need, children's hospitals. Perhaps her most famous, moment in time, and this is where America comes in. In 1932, a group of prominent Americans, including the leadership of Columbia University right here in New York City, decided to bring Alice to America to be part of the Lewis Carroll centenary celebrations. It was that trip that introduced Alice to the entire world. She made a speech that was broadcast nationally across North America, different parts of Europe. The media went crazy. You can imagine the Depression is raging. Enter Queen Alice, an 80-year-old English lady with an enchanting smile and a faraway look. America fell in love.
Cathy Rubin giving us the backdrop on the real Alice in Wonderland.